Hey guys, so for my special topics paper, I decided to investigate alcoholism and how it affects families. And I chose this topic because alcoholism is often thought about as an individual problem, and I wanted to learn more about how it can affect family members. And alcoholism, like other addictions, carries a stigma where people who are addicts are seen as inferior or making a choice to be addicted or unworthy of sympathy or respect. And you mostly hear about AA, but you really don't hear about other forms of treatment, or at least I personally haven't. So I was interested in seeing what other forms of treatment were available. And this topic hits close to home because my dad struggles with excessive drinking, and I also have an interest in potentially working with people who struggle with substance abuse issues. So that's why I thought this topic would be an interesting one to cover. So when I was looking at the effects that alcoholism has on family, the main ones that came up were physical and emotional abuse, neglect, and increased stress, depression, and anxiety. So it's not uncommon for an alcoholic to have physical or emotional outbursts, which can lead to an increased tension and stress within the household. So I know growing up, my dad never got physical with us, but he did have some episodes of emotional outbursts, and these outbursts were mostly directed towards my mom. So my parents would argue about my dad's drinking, and growing up in that environment, it's stressful. So I can see firsthand how having an alcoholic parent can lead to an increase in stress and tension, even when those outbursts are not necessarily directed to you, but it does have an effect on the entire family. And children of alcoholics are also more likely to experience neglect. Sometimes, with alcoholism, alcohol becomes a priority, and they might replace the importance that was placed on birthdays or school events or family events. So the family might feel neglected because the parent or anyone else in the family struggling with alcoholism might be too drunk or hungover to attend certain events, or they might just not care enough anymore to attend certain events, which can also, increase the depression and anxiety felt within a household. And oftentimes, parents that struggle with alcoholism, they might have more inconsistent and harsher punishments for their children. So this creates a sense where children might be confused because they don't, it's not a constant form of discipline. So they might be confused and they might think that they're at fault when really the issue is the alcoholism and not the child. And alcohol can also place financial burden on families. So alcohol can get expensive, especially when you're building up a tolerance and you need more and more alcohol to reach the desired level of intoxication. But it can also lead to further expenses because when someone is drunk, they might not think through as well when it comes to buying things. They might think they have more money than they do, or they might just not care about spending money as much as they would if they were sober. Also, like when I was growing up, I know my dad lost his wallet a couple times, and he always had large sums of money in the wallet. So that was, some income that was lost, or some money that was lost because, of excessive drinking. He lost his phone a couple times too. So those were also expensive items that had to be replaced. So these were expenses that weren't necessarily planned, but that resulted because of excessive drinking. And alcoholism can also lead to serious medical conditions which require medical attention, which can be very expensive, especially if someone doesn't have insurance or other means of paying for these medical expenses. So as much as family experiences negative consequences because a family member is struggling with alcoholism, they can also be enablers. And sometimes it's hard for families to distinguish between helping and enabling. So enabling was defined as anything that protects a person from feeling the full consequences of their behaviors. So for example, if an alcoholic can't follow through with commitments, and the partner or a spouse or a child or anyone else in the family makes excuses for them or covers up for them, they're enabling them because the alcoholic will then not see the full consequences of their actions. So they might not think that drinking is that big deal because someone's always there to quote unquote clean up their mess. And it's hard not for families not to enable someone, because oftentimes alcoholism can have serious effects such as homelessness or jail time or not having money for food or basic necessities. And nobody wants to see a loved one experience any of those hardships, so it's hard not to enable someone when you feel you have the means to help them. So that's why it gets tricky. But one thing that came up was that you shouldn't push families to stop enabling someone if they don't feel they are ready. It's counterintuitive to make threats and not follow through with them. So that's why it's important for families to feel that they are ready to stop this enabling behavior. And I thought it was interesting, something that came up was sometimes, when someone has an alcoholic in their family, one member might become enmeshed with this person. So their mood and their activities might depend on the mood and the activities of the alcoholic. So it is recommended that they distance themselves, from the alcoholic, and they hit their own rock bottom along with, with the alcoholic hitting their own rock bottom as well, and they go through their own recovery process. So I thought that spoke volumes to the fact that even though a person might not be experiencing alcoholism or other addictions themselves, they still have to go through this recovery process and hit their own rock bottom. So it just speaks volumes to how alcoholism, deeply affects family members, or can deeply affect different family members. I also thought it was interesting that people who struggle with substance abuse issues actually have more contact with their families than people who don't have substance abuse issues. I thought it would be the opposite, but I guess it does make sense considering if you have substance abuse issues, your family might call up to check on you more often, or they might call them for resources or support. So I guess that does make sense. So family therapy is actually beneficial for treating alcoholism, because when the family comes together to go to therapy, it creates a sense of support. So the alcoholic might not feel like they're alone in their journey to recovery. And then also, when the whole family, goes to therapy together, they get to explore and analyze their family dynamic and see the different ways that family members might be contributing or enabling to someone's alcoholism. So if someone goes to individual therapy and they return back to a dysfunctional family or dysfunctional setting, it's likely that they will relapse. So it's beneficial to include the family to avoid, returning to the same environment that helps perpetuate alcoholism. And one of the therapeutic techniques that were used were abstinence contracts. So abstinence contracts are behavioral goals that are set by the therapist and the family. So for example, if the alcoholic is the parent, some of the goals for them might include being more involved in their family's life or being more involved at home. If the alcoholic is an adolescent, the goals for them might include doing better in school or being more involved in sports or other activities. And abstinence contracts are usually done further into therapy. They're not done early on. And it's really a way for the family and the therapist to measure the progress that is being made by the alcoholic. So it's usually a weekly check of that progress to see if the certain goals are being met. And it's also a way for the therapist to see how sobriety impacts not only the alcoholic, but the family as a whole. So with newly sober person in the family, some of the roles in the family might change. So for example, if one family member was always rescuing the alcoholic, they might have a change in identity that they might have to work through. And it's through this abstinence contract, it's important for the therapist to really teach or help the alcoholic with coping mechanisms, because they might be uncovering severe emotions that they might not have been in tune with when they were, consuming alcohol. So we should care about this topic as future or currently practicing clinicians, because alcoholism negatively impacts many people in our society and around the world, and alcoholics and their families are likely to be experiencing significant distress, and therapists can help alleviate some of that distress and help teach, help teach healthy forms of communication, interaction, and coping. And alcohol abuse is actually a very common reason that many people give for divorce and for seeking marriage counseling. So the main takeaway point is that alcoholism can have significant effects on the individual and the family, but therapy can help overcome some of these hardships. And we should start viewing alcoholics and their families as people who can benefit from additional help instead of pitying them or thinking less of them because of the addiction that they struggle with. So thank you guys for watching, and I look forward to learning more about the topics that you guys chose to investigate.